As you all know, this is the month where our theme is service to the world. And we've looked at that through different windows. And the window that was proposed for this week was the notion of creating a world of love and peace and compassion. And I have to be honest, the person that put together today's packet really left me confused. There were 3 points that she wanted to share, and she listed point 1 and she listed point 3, but there was no point 2. And I thought, well, this is exactly calling me to figure out how it is that communities come together to express peace and love and compassion. And the answer really comes through that notion of service. I was really struck by the synchronicity of spirit with respect to, Cheryl, what you were saying about how you were hit yesterday, particularly in this transition time between summer and fall, this time of living is easy to the time when it's a little bit more difficult. And similarly, when Charlie was identifying the notion of the synchronicity of things, that there was something you wanted and you didn't know exactly how to ask for it, and you thought, well, I just will ignore it, and then you get this phone call out of the blue. And the phone call takes you exactly where you want it to be, and on the way to exactly where you want to be, the hat arrives, and the hat says that what you desire, you will manifest. What I would propose is the idea that service in the context of community is that very vehicle to manifestation. Now, I wanted us to see that YouTube together because what I was struck by was the variety of ways that service could show itself up as. How it could come in many different examples. Some of the examples I saw at the very beginning was that very commonly identified notion of service of being out there helping others who have less than us. There they are in a van, it's 20 degrees, and they're handing out hand-knit socks and hand-knit hats so that the people will not be as cold. They're providing coffee, they're providing beverages so that the people who are hungry, the people who are thirsty, that their needs are met. Then you start to get some of the religious ideas that inspired that. And I want to be careful treading into religion because sometimes religion has caused so much harm and so much pain that to bring it here can be a challenge and it can be possibly painful because while spiritual principles can be very inspiring, sometimes the religious organizations that become established to set those forward become so established that they then try to do their job in a way that is completely disregarding the spiritual principles out of which they originally arose. That whole notion that we should love one another, there have been how many great teachers inspiring that notion of love one another. And that's the simple thing. The idea of the golden rule, it's something that permeates culture after culture, religious tradition after religious tradition. And yet you can see that love one another is not what has always happened. You might consider the example of the Crusades. You might consider the example of the Ku Klux Klan.
The Inquisition.
You might consider the Inquisition. I think that it doesn't take very much to consider. You have people now who are feeling very threatened. There are people who are on either sides of issues, wondering, why is it that I'm right and they're wrong, and why is it that they can't see my position? Why is it that it doesn't work? Well, to explore this notion of service and service expressed in community, I actually want to take a step backward to a religious tradition that didn't get mentioned here. It's the story of Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha. Now, you may all be very familiar with the story, but the notion is, according to legend, Siddhartha's father was a king, and he heard the prophecy that his son would be born and become a great leader. He would either usher his kingdom into great wealth, because he was a king of a very poor land, and it was on the outskirts of nowhere. So it's not as if Siddhartha was from cosmopolitan New York City in modern day terms, or even Seattle. Siddhartha was really much more like Upper Kitsap, where Ma and Pa Kettle might be. He wasn't really in the thick of great things. So it was the notion that he would either bring this kingdom into great wealth, that he would be a great warrior, or that he would be a spiritual leader. Now, his father was very concerned. Out of those three options, spiritual leader was not one of the things that was on his short list of goals for my son's achievement. Therefore, his father established a protocol, a way to ensure what he thought would ensure, how to protect those two uppermost possible choices: military kingdom, economic kingdom. So he raised him in a lavish palace, completely separated away from the squalor and the suffering and anything that might attract some religious interest, some spiritual compassion. So for years, Siddhartha lived in this palace. But you know, sometimes you just got to get out. And on one of those occasions, he was out with his charioteer, and while he was out there, he identified three things. He identified a sick person, and he had never seen a sick person, and he's like, "What is this?" And his charioteer, who was from the outer world, was able to say, "You know what? Some people get sick." Siddhartha was like, "I never knew." And they drive along a little bit further, and he sees poor people, and he's like, "What are these?" And the charioteer doesn't say, "Well, this is basically your subjects. This is basically the way your subjects live." Finally, he sees a dead person on the road. He's like, "What's that?" "Well, Siddhartha, everybody dies." Siddhartha was so moved by this experience that he decided to go out into the world, to leave behind the opulent palace, the lush luxury into which he had such a life that his father had hoped would hone his skills as an economic master, would hone his skills as a military expert. And yet, despite all of that honing and training, all it took was that one day out with his charioteer. And boom, he's gone. He joins an ascetic group, and they give up. Wine, food, women. It's a very stark, very humble lifestyle. And he's practicing this for years and years and years. Now, one of the pieces of this story that always used to completely bug me is that Siddhartha was married and he had a son. And I thought, what a loser. My gosh, here he is. He just abandons his family responsibilities and he's off on his own pursuing his stuff. Does anyone else ever get into a place of judgment?
Never.
Okay, well, then this is a confession. Perhaps a little bit like St. Augustine, who had done exactly the same thing. Augustine had a common law wife and a son, and when he had his religious calling, he left them too. So what was it about this moving into a spiritual life that meant letting go of these past opulences and even these past responsibilities? How is it that that's an action of service? Isn't it of service to care for the people where we came from rather than serving the unknown? How is it that you balance those two things? Well, in Siddhartha's case, he joined with these ascetics, and he was with them for a number of years. What I hadn't realized, because I hadn't really done very much research, I just found myself annoyed and irritated, but I never really looked up what had happened with Siddhartha's wife and what had happened with Siddhartha's son. You see, Siddhartha's wife was similarly pushed by her own family. Her family was very happy with having a wealthy lifestyle. And so they were very happy that they had found the father of a man who was prophesied to become a very wealthy king. And they thought, this is perfect for our little one. The fact was that when he left, she then took on a very simple lifestyle at the palace. She took on the same practices that ascetics did, which was unusual because up to that point, women didn't generally do that. So one of the things that I discovered in my research now was that Siddhartha's wife was really a pioneer herself. She decided to let go of everything that her family had pushed her towards. Sometimes that's what service in community means. Sometimes service in community means stepping outside of what's familiar and stepping into what's unfamiliar. Sometimes it means that there are consequences that hit us and we have no idea that they're going to hit us. We simply find ourselves overwhelmed by some desires. So in that story that we just saw, the notion of creating the art and the mosaics, it was really just about maybe using a little bit of creativity and raising a little bit of money, but it ended up becoming so much more. And that's what I would say service provides. Service provides a means to something far greater than what we can imagine. When they set out, they hadn't envisioned that this was going to be care for the sick. They hadn't envisioned that this was going to be care for the disabled. They hadn't envisioned that this was going to be something that would connect people, that this would generate its own community within a community. They hadn't realized it. So, Siddhartha is in his community of ascetics. And when he's about 7, his son is wondering, well, where's Dad? Can I see Dad? And the grandfather thinks, well, okay, this is going to be the way we're going to get him back. We are going to bring Siddhartha back, and he's going to see his little boy, and he's going to feel guilty. So, Siddhartha shows up. But rather than feeling guilty, his sense of guilt is, I should have been teaching my son everything I've been learning as an ascetic all along. Much to the grandfather's not delight. So grandfather thought, okay, I've raised one son who didn't get it, now I've got this grandson, and he's been raised in opulence even though his mother has kind of gone off the deep end and is doing the same thing as his wacko father. But if I can get this grandson, everything will turn out wonderfully. Siddhartha sees his son, and his son's like, I want to be like that. Siddhartha's son doesn't say, ew, what you're doing is icky. I don't like it. No, he wants to follow what his dad is doing. But what his dad starts to notice is that even though he's following this religious path that has been followed for generations and for ages, something isn't working. So he's had his life in the palace. He's had his life with the ascetics. And after this time with his son, a woman offers him rice. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine an ascetic is being offered rice? And he has the unmitigated gall, the unmitigated nerve to say yes. and he has the rice, and he bathes in a river. And the ascetics are completely, ugh, they want to be done with him because this is completely on the other side of the railroad tracks. This is not what ascetics do. But it really isn't what a prince would do either. So, even before he's had his enlightenment, before he's had his meditative moment to understanding, he's really already walking on that middle path. He's going on the way that's just right. And that's what I would say this whole pathway is. Sometimes the path to service, maybe we're coming from an affluence. Maybe we are encouraged to move into service because our life has been so good and we see others who are in need and we feel sorry for them. So we would like to do more for them. So we might take on a particular way of being that is different. I remember when I was a young man, I was very captivated by the notion of becoming a priest. And to be a priest, there are a couple things that you do. To be a priest, you agree to a vow of poverty. My family was pretty well off. Even though my family went bankrupt, they got out of bankruptcy and they still did pretty well. I mean, my dad could pay for college, so it had to be well enough to have recovered for college. College wasn't cheap. There was also the vow of celibacy, which is you won't be connected with people in a close, intimate way. There was a vow of distance. Sometimes it seems as if a spiritual path will require certain vows from us. And what I would like to invite with the notion of service is that those vows really are about the vow of waking up. A vow of paying attention to what's going on. A vow of deciding, what am I going to do now and here? That waking up is exactly what happened to the Buddha. After he had his lovely meal of rice and after he bathed, he decided he was going to meditate under the Bodhi tree until something hit him. And what hit him was that middle way. Each one of us is the Buddha. Each one of us is that opening through which spirit can consciously come into the world. How we then move forward in service is as completely unique as each one of us. There is no particular single path that is the right path to service. What happened, though? After his awakening, Buddha felt overwhelmed because there was all of this knowledge and all of this wisdom, and there were just no words for it. Have any of you ever had a sudden insight and you just could not wrap your tongue around it? You just did not know how to explain it. You didn't know how to package it. You didn't know how to tell anyone else about it. You just felt it so deeply that there had been some kind of cellular change. There was this notion that who you were was completely different than who you are because of that insight. Buddha got the message that he should teach. So in his case, his service was his teaching. You know who he taught? You know who came? His ascetics. His wife. His son. There was a shift. And what happened was a community gathered. And a community gathered irregardless of gender, irregardless of background, irregardless of economics, irregardless of which side of the country did you come from and which side of the country did you care about and who was your top nominee running for king. It was a community. And out of that community, service came forward. My invitation for all of us is to do two things. So this is what I'm really inviting us to do this week in terms of the practice. I want us to consider all of the places where we find ourselves in community. And it can be as simple as, well, I came to Northern Lights, so I've got a community there. What I would propose is that wherever we step becomes a place of community. When I was in practitioner training, which is one of the steps on the way to ministry in the Church of Science of Mind and in Centers for Spiritual Living, we had a retreat. And at the retreat, we were to be silent. Now, you know me, and silence isn't something that I naturally embrace. Silence is not my general way of being in the world. At any rate, what occurred to me when I was in silence, sitting with other people that I liked and that I wanted to hang out with, and here I was at a retreat with some of my best friends, and I had to keep my mouth shut and couldn't be making eye contact, I couldn't do any of that. What occurred to me as I was chewing each piece of my food was I started tracing back. Where did this rice come from? Somebody at this place, at this retreat center, prepared this rice. So I thought of my connection to that person. And I thought of the connection to the bag of rice and the place that sold it. So it went from the person that prepared it to the person who it was purchased from at the store, to the person who shipped it to the store, to the factory that loaded the rice and the factory that printed the bag that the rice was in, back further to the people in the factory who created the rice, to the people who farmed the rice, to the people who cared for the land that the rice came from, to the earth where the ground and the water and the sun were shining and creating this rice, and all of this from a single bite. What happens if we be conscious of every bite opening our minds to the communities that are supporting us? How often do we move through the world completely oblivious to all of those peoples who have supported us? We park in this lot. At some point, somebody put asphalt down. It's much easier to walk on this than to walk through brambles and brushes and trees and woods. Raquel has her car parked over at Walmart, and it's charging up with electricity. There's electricity there, and all of the people that go into creating that and having it come here. All that happens for us to be able to turn on a spigot and water comes out. So the homework for this week, and I'm going to use that word, the homework, the spiritual practice for this week is just once a day, take time to follow and track all of the communities that have led to the experience you're having. And I don't know about you, but I do know for me that experience with the rice, and then my next bite was salmon. I had a whole different journey with the salmon. Because salmon and rice are two different things, and they went to two different places. And for me, they were really cosmic places, because who knew that in a bite of rice and in a bite of salmon, so much of the cosmos was right there, coming into me. One of the teachings of the science of mind is that it is done as we believe. That as you think something, you bring it about. Again, Charlie described that experience. So as we are thinking about our communities, that is a contribution to our communities. We're simply becoming more and more awake to those communities. We're becoming more awake to our place in those communities. In the song, there is only one of us. In your eyes it's me I see. There is only one of us. If there's only one of us, how do we look to community to remember that? Okay, so community homework, first number one. Number two is to consider, how do I engage in this service? What are the ways that I'm going to choose? The ways are whatever awakens in your heart. But you have to give a space to listen to it. You have to give a space to say, I will be ready to hear what it says. Buddha's father was none too happy with the notion that there were three options. And then his son went on that path to the third, least favored option. Sometimes the call that we hear may be the least favored offer. We may think, okay, God, I'm going to wait until something better comes along. Spirit, I'm sitting here waiting. I didn't like what you said the first time. I want something a little different, something a little bit more, like this rather than that. Whenever we find ourselves bargaining, it's a great sign. Because you'll see that in that story of the Buddha, the king, the bargainer, didn't win the bargain. He tried his very best, setting up a realm of luxury, of opulence. Didn't work for the first generation, didn't work for the second generation. He just was not going to get it. His kind of contrasted with what the notion is, what's in your mind you will get. Because he was holding on to it so tightly that he strangled it. If he had perhaps given a little bit more freedom, there would have been a little more space. So maybe we'll be presented with something, and our gripping against it may be the very action that pulls it towards us. So how do we engage with it in a more gentle, kind, loving way? So that second piece is to listen to what the service is calling us to do. Listen to where it is that it might lead us. And then just notice, how resistant am I to this? How much do I hate this? And then the piece that we can do with that, whether we say, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. This is better than my best dream. Or, alternatively, this is my worst nightmare. I hate this. One of the advantages of community is that you don't have to hold the hate alone. You don't have to be stuck holding the bag, feeling like, oh my gosh, how is it that this terrible thing is going to happen to me? The notion of a community in service is the capacity to lean into each other. We have a chance for prayer support. You know what came up for me this week? Sometimes the notion of reaching out to others can lift it, and it doesn't have to all fall on our shoulders. Sometimes the way that we are called to service, which may be something that we don't like at all, and are not liking it, is the service that others will provide for us. Sometimes it's the willingness to just be willing. Okay, I'll consider it. I may not like it, but I'll consider it. So, our two pieces of homework: follow back the communities that we're in. Listen for how it is that we are uniquely called to serve. If we love it, great. there's kind of a flow chart. If you love it, then just follow it. If you hate it, rather than running away from it, because, there's all kinds of stories about what happens when you run away from it. I'm trying to think the guy, Jonah. Jonah is a classic example. There's an Old Testament character. He's a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord says, Jonah, go to Nineveh and save them all. I don't want to. They're icky. I don't like them. So what does Jonah do? He hops on the first ship that's going as far away from Nineveh as it can get. Ship ends up in a storm. The sailors find out, oh, you were supposed to go to Nineveh, and you're going the opposite direction. They throw him off, and the storm is over. Dude is picked up by a whale. Where does the whale land? Of course, Nineveh. Sometimes that service and that no just is inescapable. The king got stuck with having the son Buddha. Boo-hoo. Actually, the end of the story is that the king ends up getting a blessing and seeking a blessing from his son, who's become the Buddha. So even though he fought it tooth and nail, at the end, he goes for the blessing. And he finds that his impoverished kingdom is far richer because of all of the influence that Buddha has brought it. So on the deathbed, to receive the blessing of his son, we don't have to get to our deathbed with the service that we're called to do. We can lean into each other. We can lean for support. And so it is.
So it is. And so it is.